Hello and welcome back to the Gridiron Podcast. Today is episode 19 in our season preview series, and today is the number 14 ranked seed, the Cleveland Browns. And today, of course, as ever, joined by Matt and Sam. How are we today, boys?
Absolutely spiffing, mate. Been spending money today, got my new job, so buying shirts, spending money on things I don't need. I'm in a good mood.
Yeah, I'm doing great. Just had a Chinese, got a 3-day weekend ahead of me. The weather's looking good, and we got some cracking points to talk about on the Cleveland Browns. It's a good one.
Cool. The 9-7 Cleveland Browns is where we got them, just to add in there. But it does sound like life is good for us at the moment, and one guy who life is definitely good for is Myles Garrett. Now that is off the back of the news that today he has signed a new 5-year extension worth $125 million in new money, which makes him the highest paid non-quarterback in the league. What do we make of this deal, boys?
Makes
Deserved.
sense.
100% deserved.
Yeah.
I don't think there can really be a bad word to be said about this from the point of view of the franchise, the player, anything. I think it makes sense. They've got a guy that can be a talent in that position. I mean, as long as he doesn't get injured, I think, which is always a risk, always on big money deals, but it's just part of football, isn't it? But I really like this. I think when I saw it, it wasn't one that to me I looked at and was a bit like, oh, what have they done there? It was fair play.
Yeah, I mean, this is a guy who, whilst he's been on the field for this team, has been extremely productive in the 3 seasons he's been there. He is everything you want in an edge rusher. He's got production, he's got size, he's got speed, he's got literally everything. As long as he can keep a lid on his temper, which
Very
evidently
true.
people didn't necessarily know was there until he tried to cave in
Mason
somebody's
Rudolph's skull.
Yeah, but as long as he can keep that under wraps, then this is a home run hit. He's got the production. This is kind of, everyone knew it was going to happen. It was more of a matter of when and the exact details of the deal, but I don't think there's much surprise for anyone here.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, definitely. And perhaps moving on from Myles Garrett and on to Baker Mayfield. Is he able to have a bounce back year this season? I'm pretty high on him, but I really do need to see him perform again this year. What do you guys think?
He definitely needs to. I think, last year, especially coming off what he did in his rookie year, it was a massive downtick, and it was, to me, I kind of saw it as almost a few shades of Jameis in his play. Just silly throws that you just kind of look at and you can't be making them. And I think this is a massive year for him, because I think now if he comes out and he's back to a good level, and if he's just keeping the ball relatively secure, he can build from that. If these bad decisions and just he's throwing the ball away and turning the ball over a lot, there's going to be some alarm bells ringing, I think, and that's not a good position to be in as a quarterback when you're getting close to a few years out from what will hopefully be the year he gets a deal. So
yeah, there's a couple of things I think from Baker Mayfield's stand that kind of added up to make last year such the disaster that it was. I think that's when he was coming off of a historic rookie season. I mean, if he'd have played in all 16 games, he probably would have set records across the board for a rookie quarterback. So I think he was coming in with a lot of expectation as this guy who showed that he's really got some talent in his first year, and everyone was expecting him to make the jump. The other thing is, all of that off-season leading up to last year, he'd been running his mouth all year. So he was kind of running with this cocky, arrogant kind of vibe that Baker runs with, which is all very well and good, and I actually really like that about him. But it means that when he doesn't play up to that, everyone goes, well, he's terrible, he's a complete bust, he needs to shut up and start playing. And you've got the Colin Cowherds of the world who think that a player's personality is more important than what they do on the field, who will absolutely bury them.
Yeah, I mean, he's very harsh on him, isn't he?
Yeah, I think if Baker can cut down on the interceptions, which I would hope to see with an improved offensive line. I really like the pickup of Jack Conklin and drafting a lineman right with their first pick in the draft. This should be a vastly superior offensive line, which I think gives Baker that little bit more time to sit in the pocket, let his receivers open up the field, and if they kind of scheme around what he does best, and don't try and ask him to do more than what he's good at, then this could be a really, really effective offense.
100%.
I don't know if you guys have noticed, but this off-season, Baker's been very quiet.
Yeah.
He's not been coming out and saying, like this time last year, he was coming out saying this Cleveland Brown, with all the talent they've got, that they're a playoff team and that they could be incredible. And I think now he's realised that his period of grace is up. He has to perform now. 3 year in the league. He's got everything around him. I think after this year, if that O-line is better than what it was last year and he still performs like last year, there'll be questions around his long-term future there. But I think he's a prime bounce-back potential. I would look for his touchdowns to stay in that 25 to 30 range, so a slight increase in touchdowns. But if he can cut down those interceptions from 21 to 12 to 15, suddenly they are a playoff team, I think.
Oh, yeah, without a doubt. I think this is one of those teams, again, that the ceiling, potentially, if everything clicks, is relatively high. And although, yeah, we said we've got them at 9-7, if they came out and maybe put 2 more wins on that and came out as an 11-win team, I'm not going to be that shocked. Because I think the pieces are there. It's just whether it can all link up together, which is slightly debatable on, which is why I think we've got them a little bit lower. But yeah, you said they've got everything they could need there on this offense. I think it's potentially one of the most stacked offenses in the league.
Yeah, I mean, if this offense can click, that has got all the potential to be a historic offense. The question is, can it all click? Can they get? They've got a lot of egos in that room.
Yeah,
a lot of egos. There's already talks of Njoku wanting out because he's worried he's not going to get the targets he thinks he deserves. So you've got 2 tight ends there who are very well respected tight ends within the league, and they just drafted a young kid who's no slouch himself. So they're stacked at tight end, they're stacked at receiver, they're stacked at running back. If that offensive line holds up and Baker can stop throwing the silly picks, suddenly you've probably got a top 10 offense in the league. And that defense is already mean as all hell. I mean, that defense, they've probably got the best defensive front, and they're a potential team for me to be the best defense in the league, I think. I really like some of the pickups they've made. They've got some great players in the secondary. I really like the value in getting Grant Delpit in the second round.
Yep.
And if everyone on that defense comes in and plays aggressive, their secondary is a big ball hawk in secondary, and they've just got a mean defensive line, then I reckon they could be in the conversation with San Francisco at the end of the year for, wow, that really is that good of a defense. At which point, the offense doesn't have to be the best offense; it's just top 10, and you've got a really, really contending team.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, the potential definitely seems there for the defense. Moving back to the weapons that we mentioned, and in particular receivers, I'm looking at OBJ in particular because that is a name of, everyone knows that name. But arguably last year had a bit of a down year. I mean, looking at his catch percentage, 55.6%. Where do we see his season playing out this year?
I have a little bit of a gut feeling that this is going to be a bit of a bounce back with him, but that is also linked in to Baker. I think you need Baker to show up and be a bit more back towards what he was in his rookie year and less of the picks. And if he can do that, I think when you've got someone like Odell there, who there's no argument on the talent, if you can just play work and just give him a shot at getting the ball, I think he's one of those guys, can go and get it. And when he gets it in his hands, he can make magic happen. So I think Baker will come in better. So tagged along with that, I think Odell will get back to more of what we expect from him. I think it will be slightly, maybe not up to his heights that he had at points with the Giants, just purely because it's a stacked offense. There's a lot of mouths to feed, so he might not get quite as much of a share as he obviously did at the Giants. But I think in relation to how many catches, how many targets he gets, he'll be effective. If that makes sense.
I think this is an offense that if Baker plays to the level that everyone is expecting that he can, and he cuts down on these interceptions and drives are lasting a bit longer and stuff like that. I mean, last year was a down year for Odell Beckham Jr. Still went over 1,000 yards.
Exactly.
If the number of receptions goes up a bit and his catch percentage can go up, then he is easily a guy who could go for well over 1,200 yards.
Yeah.
And at that point, I think you're then his ceiling is purely determined by the ceiling of the team in general. I think this is a prime candidate for a team that will have 2 receivers go over 1,000 yards. I think Jarvis Landry will go over 1,000 yards, but I still think Odell Beckham could really go. I think he could be a massive, like for fantasy especially, quietly could be a real value because people have been burnt on him year after year where they take him in the first round expecting him to be a wide receiver 1. Wouldn't be shocked this year if he doesn't turn in 1,400 yards and 6 or 7 touchdowns.
Yeah, definitely. I think another name to watch coming out of that wide receiver room, I think not anywhere near the sort of stats Sam's talking about, but is Peoples-Jones. He took in the draft this year. I think it is a bit more of a long-term talent, but a guy that I think is going to get little opportunities here and there this year. And I mean, I picked him in our Dynasty rookie draft, and I think he's one of those guys just to keep a little eye on. I think he's going to show good signs and gradually work himself into a role throughout the season. And I think this time next year, we'll be talking about him more as the 3, maybe in a battle for that for that number 3 spot behind the 2. But I think just keep an eye on him.
He's incredibly raw. You go and watch a lot of his tape from at Michigan, and he is a very raw prospect. He has got, in terms of, he's got all the physical tools that you would want from like a number 1 receiver. He is just very raw. But some of that isn't actually his fault, I don't think. The offensive system that they're running Michigan isn't the best for wide receivers. They weren't asking him to have to run a full route tree. There are a lot of things that he just wasn't asked to do in Michigan, which he may very well be capable of doing at the next level. He just needs to be in a system that asks him of that and gives him the opportunity to show that. So I think, like you said, I'm less high on Peoples-Jones for this year.
Yeah.
But I think as the season goes on and he develops his route tree, he could very easily work his way into being that number 3 guy. And by this time next year, he is cemented in the offense.
Yeah.
One of the things I do want to say just quickly, while we're still talking about, like, before we hit the fantasy properly, is just how well this front office drafted this year. And I must say, for the last couple of years, they've drafted incredibly well. But this year especially, I think they had maybe the second best draft of all the teams in the league. They just got, at every pick, they got some form of value. Like, I'm just going through it. I think Jedrick Wills, to get him at 10 without having to trade up, a lot of people will have had him as their number 1 offensive tackle. Obviously, Andrew Thomas went to the Giants a bit earlier, and there were the questions over which one's the number 1, but there were a large portion of analysts that said Jedrick Wills was the number 1 and didn't think that he would be there at 10. So I think that's a great pickup to get the guy they wanted and to not have to trade up. To get Grant Delpit in the second round, he had a bit of a down year at LSU by his standards, but I mean, he was dealing with injuries and he didn't play up to his capabilities. But I mean, he is a first round talent kind of guy who had a bit of a down year and slipped to the second. I have no qualms with the fact that I think he will project to the next level very well, and he can be a starting safety there and beef up this already brilliant secondary. There's a number of LSU guys in that secondary at the moment, and that's going to look mean next year. Yeah. I like the pickup of Jordan Elliott in the third round. I think he's a contributor. Like when a lot of people don't respect in the draft is, yes, in your first and your second rounds, you're taking guys that you're drafting to be stars, but the majority of players on an NFL roster aren't stars. They're guys that are rotational guys. They come in and they do a job. And I think Jordan Elliott and Jacob Phillips, both third-round picks, will both see playing time and will contribute on this team. To take Harrison Bryant in the fourth round, I think might be one of the steals of the draft. I mean, you got Cole Kmet going in the second. This is a guy that led the FBS last season in receiving for a tight end, I believe. He won I forget the name of the award, but it's like the award for best tight end in the nation. the name's evading me, but I think he's a guy that, especially with the cap issues and right, are we going to have to pay Njoku if we don't trade him? He's the kind of guy who, while this year might not be a massive playmaker, in a year or two, as he works into the league, as it takes to tight ends to really work in, he could be their starting tight end this time in 2 years. So that could turn out to be a steal in the 4th round. Nick Harris, I think, has got a chance to get time on the field, or at least make the roster as a good rotational guy. And then we've already talked about Donovan Peoples-Jones. So I think this is one of the deeper draft classes in the league. That up and down their draft, I'm looking at guys that I think would not all make the roster, but will also contribute from day one.
Yeah, it did seem an impressive draft class this year, like you say. And Matt, you mentioned before about the long term of Donovan Peoples-Jones, and Sam, you sort of alluded to it there. One question around that is, how long does this team have a window open for?
I think you go.
I think it's very dependent on their cap issue, on how the cap plays out over the next couple of years. I mean, if Baker comes out this year and has an insane year, and he throws 30+ touchdowns, less than 15 picks, takes them to the playoffs, then then in 3 years, his resume, okay, had a down second year, but he's then got the thing of, well, hang about, I've come into this organisation, and in 3 years, I've taken us from being the absolute laughing stock of the league, where you were just picking first every year, to now we're a playoff team, we've got this, and he will turn around and say, look, I want to get paid, because there'll be plenty of other teams that would be willing to pay him. And you've already got a number of players that are on high contracts. I mean, Odell Beckham and Jarvis Landry are both earning good money for receivers. You've just paid Austin Hooper, which a not small amount of money for a tight end. You've just forked out for your star defensive end, and you've got a number of other guys that aren't on small deals. So I think for the next year or two at least, if they can get the value out of Baker and he can play well enough, then they've got a massive window open. And then I think you could kind of see them get into that Rams territory, where if they have to overpay for the quarterback, because they've already got this team of just stars, they can't afford to pay everyone unless people start taking more team friendly deals. And who knows, maybe Baker will do that.
I think the thing that sort of spins this for me is them bringing in Case Keenum this off season. I think if they're looking at it and sort of doing the calculations on that cap room and looking like, okay, we've maybe got a 3, 4, maybe even 5, a long-term window that seems to be setting up, you might not rush into that as much. Whereas I think them bringing in Case Keenum, for me, feels a little bit like they're looking at it as a slightly smaller window, where they're not going to necessarily wait around for Baker and give him a couple years, almost saying, get to it and really show you can do it, or they'll start to they're putting pressure on him, I think is the way I want to word it. It's almost there. I'm not saying Case Keenum's a guy that they could bring in and take him to a championship. I mean, Case Keenum's shown he can come in and play well. He's a guy can come in and play at an NFL level. I think they're kind of almost putting an insurance policy in place to still be in a position to get playoffs and try and compete.
Does that mean that you think that say we're 12 games into the season, the Browns are sat at 6-6, and Baker has been very hit and miss. He's had a couple of big boom games, a couple of big bust games, and very average the rest. And they think that putting Case Keenum in could be maybe a safer way. Do you reckon then that they put Case Keenum in over Baker and try and ride the defense to a playoff spot? Or do they give Baker the full season and see if he can go and do it in those final kind of clutch games?
I think it's a mixture of, one, a bit of a kick during the off-season. A bit of a, you're not coming into this season knowing you're the guy, you're locked in. Obviously, he's going to be starting unless unless you get, I don't know, injury, whatever. But there's just another guy, he's there on the practice field, he's there in the QB room, and he's an experienced guy. He obviously knows his stuff, and teams are never afraid to pick him up. So he's good. He must have a good name within organisations and sort of behind the scenes. And I think it's just a little bit of pressure there, but it's also a case of, if you could look at this once you get sort of past the halfway point and looking at it, and if you could say, if the record isn't where they want to be, it looks like they might be slipping away from being important in January, being relevant in January, and you can pin it on Baker, it's just something they can start looking at, and then suddenly you might see in practice, oh, hang on, Keenum's getting a few more reps, and almost set off a few bells in Baker's head and push him, and if he really, by, as you said, sort of that week 10, week 12 range, is throwing games away, then you hook him out. Even if you put Case Keenum in for a couple games, just to spark something in Baker, that could work. I think it's just, for me, it's almost, a bit of a insurance policy / bit of a psychological play, which makes me lean towards, going back to the original question, lean towards it being, they're looking at this as a smaller window where they know they're going to have cap issues. They need to like spark it and get it going sooner, they want the window to be before they pay Baker almost in the next couple years than think they pay him and then they hit a window, because by that point, a lot of the stars are moving on.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I see it very similarly. Put pressure on Baker, but at least you've got a dependable quarterback there as well, which they haven't really had arguably last season. So that's what I see that move as. However, let's move to the fantasy side of things, and in particular that running back room, which I know we've talked a few times about. Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt. Now I own Chubb in our dynasty, and as I think everyone knows by now, I'm incredibly high on him. Perhaps overvalue him slightly, but that's just because I don't want to lose him.
And that's just because you play fantasy and that's what you do.
I mean, again, I say it every episode, but who finished above you last season, mate? That's all I'm saying. Silence says it all.
I've never seen Sam that quiet with nothing to say.
Yeah, I know.
God, you got him there. Look at
with facts, I'm clearly an elite fantasy football player. He talks the talk, but he does not walk.
Is it the only one not in the playoffs in this podcast?
Right, okay,
yes. Yeah. I mean, funny.
All right, I think didn't you beat me by like a 0.4 or something on the final week?
Sorry, this is a conversation for people who can get into the playoffs in fantasy football.
Yeah.
But
stay quiet for the next half hour, Sam.
So the running back room. Yeah, I think there's no argument on Chubb, especially as Sam said earlier. It's a strength and offensive line, and he is proven that he's coming out and starting to be a bit of a monster. And I think at some point he's going to have one of those years, almost a Derrick Henry last year-esque year, where he just comes out and lights it on fire, and it could very well be this year. So I think there is no argument in his value.
Would you be concerned about Kareem Hunt potentially stealing away some of that value? Because I know we've discussed this before. I know we sort of have different views, but I'd like to get your take on it.
I think it's not as much of a concern. I think because even he was still effective, even the last half of last season. And I have Hunt in our dynasty. I picked him up this off season because I am high on him. I think he is going to be a bit more relevant, especially having coming in and playing a full season. And there's definitely going to be a role for him there. But I think it's going to be more leaning towards Hunt's going to be more of a passing, have a bit more to play in the pass, which is going to be congested anyway. But I think if they're purely designed and just a pure run play, a lot of that is going to be going through Chubb. There's no argument there. I think that's not at all, a doubt in anyone's mind. It's only potentially if they're getting towards points where they've got games relatively locked up, they're getting ahead of them. I think Hunt is going to potentially get some good, almost what you could call garbage time kind of carries, where especially if they're looking like they're getting to playoffs and you don't want to put your lead back in harm's way, if you're looking good, I think then you'll start to see them lean on Hunt more. So I think it's going to almost be a tale of slightly of two seasons if they're having a good year, that you see Chubb dominate and get majority of the running carries early, and then from sort of week 10 onwards, if it's looking like they're getting towards a lock, then it starts to become a little bit more of a balance, if that makes sense. But I think there's value in both, and I think Chubb, where he's being drafted, which is arguably sort of around, sometimes within that group in the first, sometimes on the turn, depending if people are going wide receiver heavy, pick him up there. There's no qualms in that. I think he's got value for this year.
Yeah, I think where last season when Kareem Hunt came back and he was allowed to play, as Matt said, in 8 games he had 44 targets, I believe. So he is going to come in and take away targets from Nick Chubb. In comparison, Nick Chubb in 16 games had 49 targets. So, I mean, you're basically assuming that Nick Chubb's targets come right down and Kareem Hunt's go right up. But I think what Kareem Hunt will take away in targets from him, I think Nick Chubb, because I expect this offense as a whole to be much better, So I actually think that where last season Nick Chubb only actually ran for 8 touchdowns, so he was a yardage monster, went for nearly 1,500 yards rushing, but he only scored 8 touchdowns. I would expect that to be north of 10 next year. So any points you're losing off targets wouldn't surprise me if they've just got more goal line opportunities.
Yeah.
And Nick Chubb is going to be the guy on the goal line. You're not going to give it off to a shorter, lighter Kareem Hunt when you've got Nick Chubb, who's absolutely stacked in the backfield, ready to bowl over people.
Yeah.
So I would expect Kareem Hunt's value to be in the receiving game. And it actually wouldn't surprise me if you don't see a lot of setups where Kareem Hunt is catching out the slot. And he's effectively playing wide receiver at times next year. So I'd keep an eye out for that. And I do think Kareem Hunt will have some value, but Nick Chubb is, lock him up. He is going to be a top 5 running back next year, I think.
Yeah, and I'm excited for that to happen. I mean, as a Chubb owner, I'm definitely happy if that does happen. But you mentioned wide receivers there, Sam, and that's a good way to segue into that department, I think. In particular, looking at, your Beckham Jr. and your Jarvis Landry. Out of those two, who are you most interested in taking for fantasy?
Oh, this is a difficult one because he's a consistent fantasy guy, but he's almost seems to be quieter about it. He seems to be a name that I guess where he always is going relatively high up in drafts because he does put the points up. There's just other names that go first. It almost is like he's not attractive when he's sat there on the draft board to some people, and I'm not sure what it is about him exactly. Like he just doesn't seem to be picked as much or spoken about as much. Maybe it's just because he is so consistent. But I think for me, I really like Odell Beckham, and I think it's a bounce back year. And I think he's going to be going a little bit later than where he should. Still, he's going to be one of those receivers that goes just after the turn, most commonly. Within that second round, sort of early to mid-second round, if you got the guys towards the back end taking their receivers. And I think anywhere there, I'd be happy picking him up for this year.
I think Odell Beckham, for me, has got very much the kind of the boom aspect to him. I mean, like I said earlier, he had a down year last year. He still went for over 1,000 yards, which is great. And the targets are there. I mean, he had 133 targets. Jarvis Landry had 138. And Jarvis Landry only had 150-ish more yards. So, if Odell can have a better year and just if he starts catching balls a bit more, and then he has a few more big plays. I mean, he only scored 4 touchdowns last year, so I would expect there to be some positive regression there. That would kind of trend more towards an average of 6 or 7, I'd imagine. But again, he could be a 10 touchdown guy. Yeah. So I think Jarvis Landry and Odell Beckham Jr. are probably going to split targets, and they're both going to be in that 135 to 140 range because they both demand those kind of targets. But I would rather draft the guy in Odell Beckham Jr., who I think's got a better chance of making a lot more of those targets. Whereas I think Jarvis Landry he'll have the targets and he'll consistently get first downs. He's a great football player. In fantasy, I want the guy who could take it 80 yards to the house off of a quick slant. So, and I think there's a very good possibility that people will be wary of drafting Odell Beckham Jr. because for the last couple years he's been going in the first and early second round, and he's been a bit of a dud for where you're taking him. So if you can get him at the end of I'd imagine he's probably going to be at the end of the second, start of the third, and then I'd
sometimes
take him.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me it depends on what sort of league you're in, who you're with, because I think that name Odell Beckham Jr. carries a lot of weight for people who, especially in fantasy, leagues. Yeah, exactly. If I look myself a few years back, he'll be the only big name that I'd know in the league. So. For that reason, I would personally take Landry over Beckham, but only on the basis that I believe that OBJ will be going a bit too early for me. And just to go with a safe pick, I like
think you're
Landry.
vastly
the consistency you talk about there is pretty good for me. So for that reason, I'm more of a Landry guy. But I can see the value that OBJ brings, and that upside is definitely there. I'm just a bit hesitant around the risk attached to that upside.
I think you might
100%.
be vastly overestimating where he's going. I mean, I've literally just now pulled up Fantasy Football Calculator, and it's got it aggregates average draft position across a whole load of different draft
Yeah.
fancy football things, and this is currently saying that his average draft position is round 7, first pick of the 7th round.
Wait,
Wait,
Now-
who's this for?
OBJ.
Odell Beckham Jr.
I,
This is what it's saying.
My mocks
Now,
have not been reflected.
yeah, I was going to say that seems a bit.
That
sketchy.
seems outrageous.
But
If
he's
that is the case,
Oh,
I'll
yeah.
be taking OBJ, obviously. But
so
I
yeah,
just-
so that this to be fair, that is across multiple formats. So his in PPR, his average draft position at the moment is saying looks right about the start of the 4th round. In half PPR, it looks like he's going at the start of the 5th round. In just standard scoring, it looks like he's going in the 7th round. And then for dynasty startups, he's going mid-second round, which surprises me actually that he would be going that much earlier in dynasty. But I'm thinking in most of your average leagues, if you take it across that and you're saying half PPR, I think he'll be there in the 3rd or 4th. And if he's there in the 3rd or 4th, then you take him. That's great value. But there is the thing, is if you took him in the 2nd, I'd be a bit wary because he could have another year like he has done the last 2 years, and then you don't get the payoff.
that's my concern, if I'm being honest. But yeah, if he's there 4th, 5th, whatever, then that's a no-brainer in my opinion. Just for the upside is massive. Perhaps the tight end room we could talk about. Austin Hooper in particular. Where do we rate him? And all this is assuming that David Njoku does get that trade out, because all things that I've seen point towards that. But
I think it's a difficult one because you look at players like Yannick Ngakoue for the Jags. He's been talking about being traded for so long, and there was the same with Fournette, and it just never happens because the team don't get offered the value they want. The Bucks tried to ship off OJ Howard, who obviously hasn't shown as Njoku's shown, I think, to be a bit more consistent. But the Bucks couldn't even get what they wanted for him there. So I think this could be one that, as much as you might want out, they're not just going to let him go for nothing. And I think it's a really difficult one. I think Hooper's going to be overdrafted in places off of last season. But you got to remember, it's a different system, new team. Yeah. He's coming into Njoku's team at that position. And obviously these are two guys that are going to be drafted. But I think at where they're going to be drafted, I don't really want to draft either. Because you don't know how this is going to play out. It's too uncertain for me. I think if before you're doing your drafts, let's say if Njoku does get a move away, then you can start looking towards Hooper, but don't necessarily expect him to come out and do what he did last year and be tight end 1, depending on your scoring format, or right up there as a top 5 tight end. You're potentially going to get burnt by him. I'm just a little bit cautious until I know more about what's actually happening here.
Yeah, I completely agree with Matt. I wouldn't go near any of them. Actually, that's a lie. I wouldn't invest any serious draft capital in them. Yeah. If they're sat there later rounds and I need a tight end, then I'll take a swing. But for where I'd imagine Austin Hooper especially is going, coming off of such a good year last year, there will be those people that want to take him 7th, 8th round, and I'd rather have a swing at a Jonnu Smith in the 11th or 12th round than Austin Hooper there, because like Matt said, we don't know which one of these guys asserts themselves. For all we know, none of them is going to assert themselves, and they'll all have work, and none of them will be particularly fantasy relevant, so it's going to have to be a wait and see again.
A wait and see.
Oh
my god, you stole my phrase right from my mouth. Jeez, that has annoyed me a little bit there. Yep, I'll get it anyway. We're going to have to wait and see on this one. However, for this episode, unless you boys have any more points to raise,
I believe
high and dry on the points, mate.
I believe that is all we've got time for today. So, as ever, be sure to go over to YouTube and check us out. Go like, comment, subscribe. Also, check us out on Twitter and Instagram. We're at The Britiron. And we are setting up a listener league, as we've mentioned a couple of times now. We've got a couple of posts up on both Instagram and Twitter, which explain how you can be entered into the draw, which is happening end of July. I was going to say 2 weeks' time, but roughly 2 weeks' time.
Yeah.
Yep. So register your interest and get involved. But for now, thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.
See ya.
Bye.